Our first pay-per-view of the year, UFC 283, Teixeira vs Hill, takes place in Brazil on Saturday evening. And this is a really exciting card to me. I can understand to casual audiences, they may not be as interested, but I think there's a lot of interesting fights on here. So we're going to be breaking them down and predicting them, starting with the early prelims, going all the way to the main event. So let's get started. So we start off with Daniel Marcos taking on Simon Oliveira, and I'm taking Daniel Marcos in this one. Now, Simon Oliveira has got good jiu-jitsu, but Daniel Marcos' takedown defense should be able to hold up, and it shouldn't be a problem. And Simon Oliveira isn't exactly great on the feet, whereas Daniel Marcos has got quite a bit of power, and I'm not exactly that confident in Simon Oliveira as a fighter. He struggled on the Contender Series, he barely scraped by, and Tony Gravely dispatched him with ease, and Gravely has lost to middle tier bantamweight. It's not even the top of the division. And on top of this, Daniel Marcos is a big bantamweight. He's very big for the division. So I just think if he gets to the floor, Daniel Marcos has got good grappling, but Simon Oliveira may catch him out with his jiu-jitsu. But I think Daniel Marcos should be able to keep it standing with his takedown defense. And if he keeps it standing, I can see it being a long night for Oliveira, and I'm going Daniel Marcos by decision. Next up, we have Loran Laseda taking on Cody Stamann, and this is a close fight for me, but I am going to lean to Loran. Now, Cody Stamann, he is good, but every time he fights someone at the top of the division, he always seems to fall short. He's 6-4 in the UFC, and he has beat people like Eddie Wineland and Brian Keller, but they were at the end of their career, or were coming to the end of their career. I believe Eddie Wineland actually retired after his loss to Cody Stamann, but he fights someone like, Jimmy Rivera, who I'm not sure if he's still even with the UFC, and he lost that fight. Now, Loran, I'm expecting him to get it done by grappling. He is a very good grappler. Most of his wins come by a submission within a round and a half, and even though some of his record is padded, he's got some big names over people like Guido Santos and I can't remember his name, but it's someone in the UFC, and I believe he beat him in the UFC. So he has got some big name wins, and even though Cody Stamann has got 75% takedown defense, I'm expecting it to fall short here with Loran's grappling ability, and I'm expecting him to find a submission, and I'm going to go with a third round submission. First women's fight of the card, where Josiane Nunes takes on Zara Fairn, and not a lot to say about this one, but I'm taking Josiane Nunes by first round TKO. And the reason I'm saying this is she has got explosive power in her hands, and Zara Fairn got TKO'd by Felicia Spencer, and that's not a good look. And on top of that, Zara Fairn, neither women has been particularly active because it's women's featherweight, but Zara Fairn has not fought since 2020, so that's a 3-year layoff. And Josiane Nunes has fought at least once in that 3-year layoff each year, so she's been quite active for the women's featherweight division in the UFC. And with that explosive power in her hands and that more activity, I'm going to take it by a first round TKO. Next up is Wally Alves taking on Nicholas Dalby. And this fight could go either way, but I'm going to go with Nicholas Dalby. He always seems to have that dog in him where he's losing the first round, and then the second and the third round he brings it back and gets a decision. And he did that in his last fight in July on the Blades Aspinall card, and he was getting dominated in that first round, and he brought it back, won the second and third round, got the decision, and that was his last fight, and he's been a lot more active than Wally Alves, who was last seen in 2021, where he's brutally KO'd by Jeremiah Wells. Now, Wally Alves has got a bit of power, and I think he could stop Nicholas Dalby in the first round, but what I think is going to happen is he's going to catch Nicholas Dalby pretty bad, win the first round, and in the second and third round he's going to gas out. Nicholas Dalby is going to take control, bring out that dog inside him, and ultimately get the decision, 29-28. Next up is Terence McKinney taking on Ismail Bonfim. And even though I believe Terence McKinney is the favourite, I think it's a risky pick. Having said that, though, I am going to take him by a first-round KO. I do believe it's a risky pick because if it goes past the third, I think Bonfim is going to get a decision or a finish. But Terence McKinney, I think his style is too quick. He's too wiry. He's very fast. And he's got some unrivaled power. He put down Matt Favola in 7 seconds, which is something that a lot of people push aside because it's Matt Favola, but Matt Favola is actually quite good. And he almost finished Giga Chad Drew Dober. I believe he's the only person that has dropped Drew Dober. And he only gassed out in that fight because he spent so long looking for a finish on Drew Dober. But Dober's got that Giga Chad chin, obviously. And even though I think he could make the same mistake here if he doesn't put away Bonfim, I am trusting him to get the first round KO. And a lot of people forget this, but McKinney's actually got a wrestling background, and he's proved he's a grappler. He's got more submission wins in the UFC than he has KOs. But ultimately, if this goes past the third, I'd say put all your money on Bonfim, but I'm going to take McKinney in the first round by knockout. Up is Jayton Almeida taking on Shamil Abdurakhmanov, and I think Jayton Almeida is a lock of the card for this one. He is ragdolling everyone he faces. 9 out of 10 times he finishes it within the first round, and I believe all of his fights have ended by finish in the ones he's won. He's 16-2 currently, and he took away the O's from Anton Takaji and Nasruddin Nasruddinov, and that's not a joke. And Abdurakhmanov, he's 5-5 in the UFC. He's 41 and he's not active. Okay, some of his losses have come to Curtis Blades, Derek Lewis, and Sergey Blachowicz, and that's not a joke. They are good fighters. But then he's lost to like a Chris Daukaus, and Chris Daukaus, as you know, and as I know, Chris Daukaus is an awful fighter. How he's still in the UFC, I don't know. But on top of that, he's 41 and he's not active. And with Jayton Almeida probably being on Costa's secret juice and ragdolling everyone, I think he's locking the card. First round submission or first round knockout. However he wants. It's ending in the first round here. Next up is Monia Lazez taking on the other half of the Bonfim brothers, Gabriel Bonfim. And I'm expecting Gabriel Bonfim to get a win here. Now, most of, if not all of his fights have come by finish. There's that weird thing on Tapology where it says they've won, but it doesn't say how. And he's 13-0, and he's actually fought decent competition, 13-4, 10-1. I believe it was 10-1. It's something in 1. And Lazez, even though he's 14-2, he hasn't really fought the best of competition before coming into UFC. He's got wins over guys who are like 5-35, 10-10, or 0-5, and that's stat pad in it. It's finest, really. So Bonfim, I suppose you could say maybe he could be a lock of the card, but Lazez is dangerous, and he has proved that he's dangerous in the fact that he's beat decent competition in the UFC. But with Bonfim finishing all of his fights and actually doing it over good competition, whereas Lazez was stat padded early on in his career, I'm going with Gabriel Bonfim by... I don't know how. I want to say he's going to get a finish, but I think Lazez is going to hang in there, so I'm going to say Bonfim by decision. Next up is Thiago Moises taking on Melquizael Costa, and I believe this is going to be the upset of the card. I believe Costa's going to get the win here. It's a very risky pick, and I understand why Thiago Moises is the very heavy favourite here. He's a massively underrated lightweight. He took Islam to the 4th round and even took him down, and his only other losses as to killers like Dariush, and I can't really justify why I'm going with Costa here. I just feel a big upset happening. There's another fight later on in the card which could be an upset, but I think this is going to be the upset of the card. I believe this is where the upset's going to happen. I just believe with it being in his debut in front of a crowd in Brazil, I know they're both Brazilian fighters, I just feel like Costa is really going to take this opportunity, and Moises taps a lot of his opponents, and Costa isn't the tapping type. He's tapped once, and that was to Rafael Barboza, who's a decent fighter in his own right. So I don't know why. I just feel the upset of Costa here, and I'm going to take him by a decision. Next up is Gregory Robocop Rodriguez taking on Bruno Ferreira. And looking at Bruno Ferreira, I know a lot of people probably want to side with him 9-0, but he's taking this fight on short notice, which is never a good look. He's stepping in for Brad Tavares, and Gregory Rodriguez, the one thing that makes me apprehensive, I'm going to take him by the way, but the one thing that makes me apprehensive to take him is that cut he suffered back in September, obviously taking his forehead wide open. You could see the tendons. I'm afraid he's coming back too short notice, and maybe it's going to cut open and they might stop it, but I'm willing to take that risk. Now, Bruno Ferreira, or Ferreira, however you say it, he's got all finishes on his record within a round or two, and that looks impressive. Once again, 9-0, but a lot of them are against cans, 1-3, 2-3, 4-7, and we don't like can crushers around here. And as well as that, with Gregory Rodriguez fighting through that injury and getting a KO win, I think that's very impressive. Of course, he did lose to Arman Petrosian, but that was a close fight. And, a few people think Rodriguez won that. And also, don't tell anyone I said this, but he may be training with Costa and some of his secret juice. So I'm taking him in a back and forth scrap, first round or second round, TKO. Next up, Shogun Rua taking on Ihor Potieria, and this is the farewell to the legend that is Shogun Rua. However, we know this sport is not kind, and in MMA years, Shogun is like 100. Yes, he's a legend, but he hasn't looked great in his past fights, and people will debate the decision with OSP over and over again. Now, Potieria, he is a bit of a can crusher, and he did lose his debut to Nikolai Nagameru. But against those cans, he's finished most of those fights within a round and a half and knocking out Lukas Soldowski on the Contender Series in no joke, and he did that within a round. And on top of that, he's younger and he's hungrier and he's got a lot more to prove. So I'm going to take Ihor Potieria, and I'm going to take him by a first round KO. Next up, we move on to the main card as Paul Craig takes on Johnny Walker. Now, I want Paul Craig to win here. He's one of my favourite fighters, being Scottish myself. And every time he walks out to Quiet Little Voices, I get so hyped. Now, his last performance was quite underwhelming. He just tried to pull guard for 50 minutes and it wasn't working. But, Johnny Walker's takedown defense is only 58%. Now, the striking shouldn't be a problem. If Johnny Walker can keep it standing, I'm expecting him to knock out Paul Craig. Because Paul Craig, even though he's been working on his striking, he isn't the best striker. And if he has improved his striking, is he just going to try and pull guard again? But I'm taking Paul Craig by first round submission based on Johnny Walker's takedown defense. Now, Paul Craig's striking isn't the best, but he can hold his own on his feet. Any good fighter can. And he wouldn't be where he is without some sort of striking. And even in fights where he's been knocked down or getting dominated, like look at the Krylov fight, he was getting dominated and he latched up that triangle. His jiu-jitsu is perfect. He is one of the best jiu-jitsu artists in MMA. If he catches you in any type of submission, you're tapping or going to sleep. And I think with Johnny Walker's 58% takedown defense, whether Paul Craig initiates a takedown or pulls guard, Johnny Walker is going to end up on the floor with him. And I think he's going to get caught in some type of submission. Not submission. Submission. I know some people, I was going to say grappling, and I changed it to submission there. Now, some people have said Johnny Walker's got the superior grappling, but it's Paul Craig we're on about. If it goes to the floor, Paul Craig is going to mess you up. So ultimately, this fight depends on where it stays. But Johnny Walker's takedown defense at 58% is just too much of a big factor here. And he won his last fight, against Jan Kutalaba, who I'm not sure is even still with the UFC now. So ultimately, Paul Craig, first round submission. Next up is Jessica Andrade taking on Lauren Murphy. And I think Jessica Andrade is another lock of the card here. She's one of the only fighters at women's flyweight that knows how to fight. And Lauren Murphy, she's not all that, is she? She got that title fight against Shevchenko off of the 5-fight win streak. But she was beating people like Roxanne Modafferi, and, you could argue she just beat Miesha Tate, but Miesha Tate had that 5-year layoff from 2016 to 2021, and she's not the fighter she used to be. Jessica Andrade is still young, she's only 31, she's going out there beating big names, so there's not a lot to say other than Jessica Andrade, another lock of the cards by decision. Next up is the featured fight, Gilbert Burns vs Neil Magny, and on paper, Gilbert Burns should be winning this. He's got all the tools he needs, powerful hands, excellent grappling and jiu-jitsu. But something about this fight screams upset to me. I don't know why. I just feel like Neil Magny could get it done with how active he's been. But I am going to go with Gilbert Burns by decision. I think, on paper, Gilbert Burns should win this. And it makes the most sense that Gilbert Burns wins this fight with how close he made that Hamzat fight. I know a lot of people think Gilbert Burns won. Personally, I do believe Hamzat won that. But, he took Hamzat to a close decision. He took him down. He was out grappling him at points. He knocked him down. It was a bit of a controversial knockdown, but it was a close fight. I do think Khamzat won, though. If you want me to break that down, let me know. If I've got time before Saturday, I will. And Neil Magny, he's susceptible to getting submitted, which is one of Gilbert Burns' favourite tools. I know his chin can be a bit iffy, but he has got powerful hands and he's good on the ground, as we've mentioned. And Neil Magny was getting out-grappled by Daniel Rodriguez. And, Daniel Rodriguez was getting on top and standing up and letting Neil Magny get back up because he knew he robbed Li Jingliang and needed to take it out. But I think if he didn't rob Li Jingliang and he was on a winning streak, he probably would have taken out Neil Magny. So, I wish this fight was Burns versus Masvidal, but unfortunately it's not. Maybe an upset's on the cards, but I'm going Gilbert Burns by decision. Next up is the history-making fourth fight for the UFC flyweight title as Deiveson Figureido defends his belt against Brandon Moreno. Now, Brandon Moreno is one of the nicest fighters of all time. I mean, he builds Legos, and I had the pleasure of meeting him in March, and he dominated Figgy the second time, but in hindsight, we can see that was due to a poor weight cut on Figgy's part. He is a big flyweight. He could arguably compete at bantamweight and still be considered a big bantamweight. And he's the number one guy in this division. He is the most dangerous. He would have won that first fight if it wasn't for the point deduction. He won that third fight pretty clearly. It wasn't close in my opinion. I'm going to be breaking that down soon. And he's very powerful. And I don't think he's going to finish Moreno. But I think from what I'm seeing now, he's had a good weight cut so far. On his Instagram, he looks as if he's had an excellent weight cut. And I think Moreno's going to have the confidence. Not only did he finish him, but, a lot of people think he won that third fight. But a lot of people forget that the first fight, before that point deduction, Figgy was winning. So I'm going to go with Figgy to get it done by decision. I could be wrong, I'm not sure if the odds are even or if they're in someone's favour. But I know on verdict, Moreno is the favourite. And I think Figgy should be the favourite personally, but that's just me. I'd like to see Moreno get it done, but personally, I think Figgy's going to get it done. So, I'm going Figgy by decision. And now, finally, we move on to our main event, where hopefully we can finally crown a new light heavyweight champion, as Glover Teixeira takes on Jamahal Hill. Now, Jamahal Hill is the favourite, I believe. I'm not saying Glover should be the favourite, but I think this is a pick-em fight, in my opinion, because Jamahal Hill has got the striking, the power to beat Glover. But Glover's got the grappling, and Glover's got that old man strength, and ultimately I'm going to go with Glover by a second round submission, and I'll tell you why. Now, we know Glover likes to stand and get into a firefight sometimes, and I think if he does that against Jamahal Hill, he's making a mistake because I think Jamahal Hill, one shot, could put his lights out. But Glover took a lot of shots off Yuri Prohaska, and people forget he was winning that fight until he got caught in that submission by Yuri. And I do think Jamahal Hill, if he clips him, would knock him out, but Glover could definitely hold his own on the feet with Jamahal and find his way into a takedown. I think if it hits the deck, Glover is going to mess up Jamahal Hill. Because Thiago Santos Glover didn't have an easy time with Thiago Santos, but Thiago Santos has not got the offensive grappling, and he was able to hold down Jamahal Hill. I might implement that into my breakdown of Jamahal Hill versus Paul Craig. And this is the other reason. Paul Craig, as I mentioned, excellent jiu-jitsu, some of the best jiu-jitsu in the UFC. But Glover's also got great jiu-jitsu. And Jamahal Hill's only loss is to Paul Craig. Because Paul Craig went in there. And I can't remember if Jamahal Hill rushed him or not. But he got caught in that arm bar. And his arm ended up, I don't know if it dislocated or snapped or what. But it flopped. And it was not a pretty sight. But I'll be doing a breakdown on that. And I just think if Glover gets it to the ground, he's going to catch Jamahal Hill in some sort of submission, probably a rear naked choke or something similar how he did to Jan. And I think it'll be all over because I just don't think Jamahal Hill has the grappling to deal with Glover. I hope he's been training his grappling for this, but he's only had a month to prepare. If he stays on the feet, I do think Jamahal Hill has it, but I just think Glover's going to be able to get him to the ground because Jamahal Hill has not got great takedown defense and great grappling. So I'm taking Glover Teixeira. I'm taking him by second round submission. So yeah, guys, that does bring me to the end of my breakdowns and predictions for UFC 283. First pay-per-view of 2023. As I said at the start, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's a good card. To the casuals, it might not be, but lots of Contender Series debuts and lots of fights that could go either way, so it's an exciting one. 15 fights in total. It's pretty stacked. This week, I'm going to be obviously reacting to the press conference, as I have done for the past two events. I'll be breaking down Paul Craig and Jamahal Hill, and I'll probably implement a bit of the Thiago Santos fight into that. I'll be doing a breakdown of Figgy Moreno 3 and telling you why it's not close, in my opinion. And if I've got time, I'll do a Burns Chimaev breakdown. But hope you have enjoyed. Protect yourself at all times. I'll see you in the next one.